All right, Entree Architect community, it's 4 p.m. Eastern, which means it's time for the Entree Architect Context and Clarity live conversation for Thursday, September 2nd. Believe it or not, we made it all the way to September by now. So welcome. Thanks for joining us. As you get here, say hi. Let us know that you're here and let us know where you're joining the conversation from. Christian Nielsen, I see you. He's here. He wins the crocheted bathtub today for first in to our conversation. Great to see you, Christian. They're on Facebook, and we have a Facebook user that says hello, which reminds me that if you would rather show up with your name and your profile picture rather than Facebook user, Facebook has these rules, these privacy policies, which we respect and appreciate. But the privacy policy says that your information, because you're coming to this conversation from a private group, cannot be released unless you give Facebook permission. So if you want to show up with your name and your profile picture, there is a URL at the bottom left of your screen right now, chat.restream.io/FB as in Facebook. Go there, go through a very, very quick process, and you will allow Facebook to talk to Restream, which is the platform that we use here. And you can show up as yourself and look just like yourself on the screen. If you're like Kurt over on Twitch, hi Kurt from Flint, Michigan, glad you're joining us. You show up just fine. Different settings there, different policies there. Or if you're like Brian on YouTube, hi Brian McCartney, son of long lost son of Paul McCartney. Glad to have you with us from YouTube. Let's see, did we have any LinkedIn's yet? Haven't seen anybody from LinkedIn yet, I don't think. But it's only the Facebook folks that need to worry about that chat.restream.io/FB. But as you get here, say hi, Barry Reed. Welcome back from Scotland on LinkedIn. Glad you're joining us. Say hi when you get here. Let us know that you're here and let us know where you're joining the conversation from. If we've never met before, my name is Jeff, and I'm in Indianapolis, and I come to this context and clarity conversation every weekday at 4 p.m. Eastern. And today I am joined by, who are you?
I'm Katharine MacPhail. Hello.
Hi, Katharine MacPhail. Thanks for joining us. Unfortunately, from the flooded Northeast.
Yeah, I think we're just going to have to get used to it.
Maybe so.
Yep.
Ida is wreaking havoc as she runs up through the right half of the country, I guess, and up towards the Northeast. So hope everybody out there continues to be safe and well. I don't know that our friends down in New Orleans will be able to watch or listen to us for a while, but I know some other friends and in Louisiana, Mississippi, they are okay. So that's a good thing to know. Ed McDonald, greetings from Indianapolis. Hi, Ed. Glad to have you with us today. We've got a good show lined up today. Our topic today is architect as developer. It's a really popular topic amongst architects, maybe especially small firm architects, but I think extending even into medium size and a little bit larger firms. But I know it's popular in the Entree Architect community. I know it's popular beyond the Entree Architect community. We've been talking about this theme of architect as developer all week this week. So if you're not familiar with context and clarity, every weekday, starting at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Clubhouse app, we have sort of a preview, what we call our coffee talk, our 30-minute coffee talk. And then in the afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern, we have our context and clarity conversation inside the Facebook group that many of you are coming from right now, the Entree Architect Community Facebook group. And we take the theme from the special guests that we're going to talk to in our live session on Thursday, like we're about to do right now. Set that as the theme for the week, and then we have individual topics every day. So to give you a little bit of a rundown of what this week looked like, we started on Monday by asking the question, if you were an architect and a developer, what would you develop? That was the question for Monday. Then Tuesday, maybe you'd love to be a developer, but you can't quite bring yourself to jump in with both feet. So the question was, what are baby steps that you can take towards being an architect and a developer? That was a really interesting conversation on Tuesday. And then yesterday, Wednesday, maybe you were inspired. Maybe this is something that you'd really love to do. You're not quite sure how to do it. Still got more to learn, as we all do, but there may be some obstacles in your way, real or imagined. So the question yesterday was, what's stopping you from becoming a developer? And I think that's a great lead up to this conversation today with our special guest that I'm going to introduce here momentarily. And like I said, it's all about architect and developer. Again, popular topic all throughout the architecture community. So great to have you, all of you, joining us. Mark LePage, I see you over there, sunny and clear at Lake Wiley, South Carolina. You're back at Lake Wiley again, from YouTube as well. It's Lally from LinkedIn. Great to have you there. Nicole, we see you in Arizona. Oh, Nicole is double teaming us. She's on Facebook and Twitch at the same time. I don't know if anybody else caught that move, but that was pretty slick there, Nicole. Thanks for joining us from two different spots. Great to have you, and everybody else is joining us. Great as you come in. Keep saying hi. Keep letting us know that you're here. Keep letting us know where you're joining the conversation from. Because another thing that I really enjoy, I don't know, I may be the only one, but the thing that I enjoy is seeing where these conversations spread. So we've already seen Barry. He's in Scotland. As I look down the list of names that I see so far, I think we have made it all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast of the United States today. But we will likely jump another ocean or so. We typically wrap all the way around the world, from Anaheim to Australia. So that's the great thing about these conversations as well, is that they are truly global, they're truly worldwide. So if you are somewhere besides the United States, I'm in the U.S., Katharine's in the U.S., our guest today is in the U.S., apologies in advance, because some of the perspective that we share will certainly be U.S.-centric. If you have a different perspective from wherever you are in the world, please share that, because we like to know, what's it like in Australia? What's it like in the Philippines or South Africa or Ghana or Nigeria or Scotland or wherever in the world you are? Just checking off kind of some of the places that we might have some friends joining us from today. So with that, Katharine, what have I missed? I feel like I've missed something. Did I forget anything?
I think you covered it, but I think it's interesting that you think of Anaheim to Australia as being all the way around the world. I mean, I guess that makes sense, but I would think Anaheim
Depends
go
on
that
the
way.
direction that you
You
go.
go that way to Australia. So
that's a fair point. Yeah,
thinking.
It totally depends on the direction that you go.
Well, right. Obviously, you go the other way to wrap the globe.
Yeah,
Just in my mind, it's going the other way.
that's right.
Random thoughts for me today.
Deep thoughts.
That's my reflection on your intro.
Okay. Deep thoughts with Katharine MacPhail today.
That's right.
Very good. All right. Well, let's not waste any more time. Let's get our special guest in here today. So let me make a quick little introduction here. Our guest today is an architect, an author, a developer, and an entrepreneur. He's the principal of Postscript Studio in New York and the author of Architect and Developer, a guide to self-initiating projects. James Petty, welcome to Context and Clarity.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Really good. Glad that you could join us. You and Katharine both shared in the green room backstage before we got started. You're both in the Northeast, and you both have gotten a lot of water. So I appreciate both of you joining us. And if anybody notices the camera kind of moving a little bit, both James and Katharine are floating right now. So thanks for joining us, James.
Absolutely. It's been an interesting night for all of us, I think.
It has. And for anybody else out there, we do hope that you're safe and staying safe and keeping those around you safe. Tony Roberts is joining us from New Zealand. There you go. There's a shout out. Depending on the direction we're going, Katharine, we've made it around the globe at this point.
Oh, good.
There
Hey,
you go.
So, for me, the worst thing about having these rainstorms in my own basement flooding is I wonder how my projects are doing, the ones that don't have any roof on them yet, or, if anybody else's basement's flooding and I'm going to be getting that kind of call.
For the clients that wanted to go for the vapor barrier instead of the waterproofing to save a little bit of money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But nobody's called yet, and it's pretty late in the afternoon, so hopefully we're clear there.
Yeah, hopefully. But I think that's when back in my one of my past lives where I was doing more architect-led design build. These were the stress times for me, right? We're building, we've designed something, we're building something, and now there's lots and lots and lots of rain. I completely understand where that stress comes from. Completely understand. One more reminder in case anybody missed it. If you're on Facebook and you're showing up right now as Facebook user, we can call you Facebook user if you'd like us to, but if you'd rather us call you by your name and identify you by your beautiful profile picture, then there is a URL at the bottom left of your screen right now. It's chat.restream.io/FB. All you need to do is go to that URL, give Facebook permission to let your information out to Restream for the purpose of this show. And you'll show up as, like I see Rod right now, Rod Warner, who says, hello, James. We see Rod and his profile picture there. So if you want to be like Rod, go to chat.restream.io/FB. And also a shout out to everybody that's listening to this in the future in the podcast version of this that'll come out on Monday. So great to have all of you listeners with us as well. James, as you know, and we talked about this backstage, lots of conversation about architect as developer this week. And so I'm always curious, in our audience this week and in the comments this week, we had a mix of people that said, hey, I would like to do this, and people that have experience, that shared their experience, which we really appreciate. We appreciate everybody sharing their experience and their knowledge and advice and everything. So the first question I think we've got to ask you is, what got you interested in development?
Yeah, I mean, I went to undergraduate down at University of Houston, and then afterwards I went to go work in Europe for like 5 years, and decided to go back to graduate school and was able to get into Yale University. And when I went there, I sort of went there with I already had a Bachelor of Architecture, so I wanted to go to graduate school with the idea of really polishing myself off and also trying to really hone in on what it was the rest of my life was going to be about. And so I took that opportunity to really focus on professional practice in a lot of respects. I always knew that I wanted to start my own practice, but the sort of like getting to that point seemed to be so mysterious. Or either you're born wealthy and with a lot of connections, or you're lucky, I guess. And so I spent a lot of my time in graduate school and seminars focusing on starting a practice, on how people generate revenue, and these kinds of things. And I did a little self project where I interviewed the founders of Shop, Work AC, and Allied Works, et cetera, on how they started their business. What were the first projects that they did? What was that nitty gritty first few years of being completely broke and working out of their basement, and before they got so famous in the way they are now? And that started getting my brain turning. I took a class with Keller Easterling, who told us in order to get into the class we had to bring $100,000, and she didn't mean cash. She meant, how do you find $100,000 out there in the world that could fund a project? And so instantly, none of us had any idea this was going to be the premise to even getting accepted into the class. But 12 of us had to go out and figure out where are grants, where are programs where people have money that need things to be built. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of money out there, and there's a lot of need for things that exists. And sometimes you just got to put the pieces together, and you can make your own thing. And so this whole time, my head is kind of turning. I'm starting to think about how are all these ways that I could start my own practice without actually having to find a client. I started to become aware of Terry Tamarkin in New York City and DDG, who were developing their own work. And suddenly it was like, wow, there's a couple of these architects that are sort of doing their own development. And the more I started looking into it, the more I started finding more and more and more. And I started talking to these guys, talking to other people, and they were like, oh, you should go meet this guy and that guy. And suddenly it was just like, wait, there's actually a lot of people doing this, a lot more people doing this than I think you realize. Part of which is because some of these guys don't necessarily advertise that they're doing this because there's no need. Most architects are advertising on the websites to find more clients. These guys don't need clients; they need financing, and the banks don't give a explicit about what your pretty buildings look like. They want returns, and so they don't necessarily advertise it, but they're doing it. And so basically, I started down this road as writing a sort of a guide to myself on how I wanted to sort of move through my own professional life. Out of graduate school, I worked for an office in the city, doing a school in Brussels, and then afterwards ended up working for Peter Gluck for the last 5 years, doing architect-led design builds in New York and Connecticut. and then just recently left there to finally just pull off the Band-Aid and do my own thing. And so it's to me, it's always been about how to launch a business. And a lot of the people that I spoke with, it wasn't necessarily their end goal, or maybe they were smaller practices trying to build up, or they were practices trying to, foster a nest egg for long-term investments. Or it was people that was just interested in it for an academic purpose, or wanting to do work that they were otherwise not going to get hired to do. They weren't necessarily all in it because they ultimately wanted to be an architect and developer. They kind of used development as a method to get to what they were actually interested in. And most of the time, they ended up getting financially rewarded for that. I've also been very interested on the ones who are not financially rewarded on that, because that's the ones that people don't talk about enough. And that's, the real risk of it all. And I think ultimately that's what all of this is. What I've really learned about it is it's just an amalgamation of professions to try to make things more efficient and to consolidate and align financial interests in a project, which is what most of us are interested in. And most of us got into here because we want to make buildings, we want to make schools, we want to make something in our community. And architecture is just a part of that. And I think you touched on this earlier in the week, that architecture is really a late part of that whole process. The developers are the ones that are setting the foundation of what a project really is, and what Kevin Kavanaugh out of Guerrilla Development calls phase zero, which is where it's the foregrounding of a project on what it is. Is it a residential building? Is it a commercial building? Does it have these kinds of aspects? How much money are we going to set aside for public programming and all of that stuff? Architects generally never get a sense or a say in any of that. But if you go back to our academic roots, that's what a lot of us are interested in. And so the only way to really get into that foregrounding is to jump in on that ground level part of the whole building process, rather than just waiting for somebody to come to you with a program and a contract and say, here, do this for a 6% fee and do it tomorrow.
Yeah, you said that. You're in danger of setting me off on one of my tangents up on my soapbox. But the way that you just said that, really resonated with me, because here's a question for everybody out there, right? If you're starting your work with programming, maybe even feasibility study, how late in the game are you? Right? If that's your starting point, how late in the game are you? I don't remember exactly how you just said it, but basically someone's dictating to you at that point what the project already is, or already dictating what that project is. That's a new way for me to think about that.
And so they likely already have the property, which already starts to say a lot about what the building is. And the other problem with all of that is, once a developer or whoever it is owns the property and has that financing in place, which they have to get all of that done before they hire the architect sometimes. But once all of that's done, the clock is on, the time is ticking, and all of the money and all of the risk is at the highest point. And so they want to go, and that's where the pressure generally comes from most architects' clients, who are just like, let's go, let's get this done tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a great point. So you had a pretty advanced start, because so if anybody from my pro practice class is watching or listening right now, warning, because I just got a great idea for our next class, but you had to show up with $100,000. So that's a pretty advanced start for anybody that, is in the audience right now that's thinking about maybe becoming a developer, or maybe dabbling in something. You're doing that in school at that point. So how do you go from there to writing the book, Architect and Developer?
It originally was only going to be interviews. Like I wanted to be able to talk to people, and I started doing that process and interviewing people and putting that together. And then I started reading a lot of textbooks, really boring textbooks, but a lot of them are really informative. The Urban Land Institute actually does put out really good, genuine products that are worth the $100 that they cost. And wanting to try to dissect a lot of that information into something that's a little more digestible to architects, even though there's no pictures in it. There's no pictures in the book at all, but tries to be at least a little bit entertaining and just little hits of like how do you work through a pro forma in a very ABC kind of way. And what does NOI, ROI, and all of this stuff mean, and what does it mean to other people? And if anything else, even if you don't, if you're quasi interested in any of this stuff, if you don't go out and do it, what it does do is it enables you to have these discussions with your own clients about what it is that they're doing and where their pain points are and how to sort of resolve those as an architect, as a regular commissioned architect.
That I mentioned this earlier in the week, but on your website, architectanddeveloper.com, for those of you out there, I'll put it up in a caption, but it's architect and developer, all spelled out, smashed together like one word.com. I believe it's on the front page. You have an article or something called books, and there's a lot of resources under there, which I think you talk about the ULI resources in that post or that article. There's a wealth of knowledge in that post. Like James is saying, I mean, he's just got book after book after book, and he's collected interviews and videos and all sorts of resources. So if you want to know more, go to architectanddeveloper.com and find those great wealth of knowledge there. So as you were doing these interviews and you were learning these things and assembling this knowledge, which of course became your book. And for those of you that missed this at the beginning, the name of James's book is Architect and Develop, a guide to initiating projects, which I love the self-initiating part of the subtitle there. How did you go from there? Or maybe my timeline is off at this point, but how did you get from that point to actually starting to do some of your own projects and getting into the development side of things?
Yeah, I guess a lot of it was trying to figure out how to do it, how to, like, I was looking at the work, especially in New York City. If you guys have seen the work of Alloy or DDG, Alex Barrett, they're really good. Like, these guys are doing really amazing works of architecture. Some of the DDG work is very, either you love it or you hate it. Like, I've seen a lot of people online really hate it. There's the architecture shaming community on Facebook, and their work gets on there every once in a while. But like, man, I love it. It's very inventive. But I'm like, how did these guys get to there? And then if you look at like The Real Deal, which is a magazine in the city for real estate, commercial real estate and residential real estate, the top 10 sales in Brooklyn is published every year. And the last couple of years, either DDG or Alloy is number 1 through 5 every single year. They're selling the highest, most expensive real estate in Brooklyn at the same time. And it's like, well, what's going on? And then you meet these guys, they're also really just great guys. And the reality is they all started really small. They all started really humble in the backside of Brooklyn or the backside of somewhere else, did a very small project just to try to make it successful. And a lot of times they ended up self-performing a lot of these things to keep the prices down and to make it a real project. And so what I kind of learned through a lot of this process is what a lot of these guys did in the founding of all of it, and how they were able to really get off the ground and get running. And some of them are a little more forthcoming than others. Hybrid Arc out of Seattle said that in his very first project, he was able to pull out $80,000. And that $80,000 of cash was his seed money for his next project, which he lost $30,000. But then he took that $50,000 and got to the next project, which then he was able to like get bigger, a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. And so I took all of that information to try to understand, for me, what was the most basic way through this. And that's what I really promote, is to keep it simple, the KISS rule, keep it simple, stupid, and to start small and to take the smaller risks and try to build up for that. So for me, my wife and I, we live in New York City. We work in New York City in a very tiny apartment. And at one point we decided that we wanted to try and find a place for the weekend, a little outside of the city, and also as an excuse for our first project. And so we spent months looking around on the outer burbs of New York, and settled on a town called Beacon, which is an hour north. It's a very artsy town. There's a big art museum here. It's got a lot of tourists coming from the city every day, especially on the weekends. And we have a mountain. And basically we spent another 6 months looking for property, and lost bid after bid after bid in a really heartbreaking kind of scenario finally got this perfect spot, perfect property that our realtor called us on a Saturday night. We were heading out to a party, called us around 11 p.m., said, "Can you be here tomorrow?" We said yes. She found a property that was a little bit undervalued, and it's a house on a double lot. House is from 1890, hasn't been touched in 50 years. It was an older woman who passed away. This was perfect. This was exactly what we were looking for, because the house is priced appropriately, but as a house, it has 2 lots. And so basically, the idea is that we bought the property. We were the first ones to see it. We made an offer before it ever went onto Zillow. We bought the piece of property. We're renovating it right now. Hopefully, it'll be finished very, very, very soon. And then by the spring of next year, we'll break ground on the other lot, to basically using that as free land to build a freestanding house. We'll sell this one, move into that one, take the $200,000 and or $250,000 per person in capital gains exclusionary tax benefits, and then move on from there to a little bit bigger for a duplex or a triplex or something like that, and basically move up scale each different time. But by doing it this way, by buying a single family house, the risk is super low. Any bank is going to give you a loan, especially right now. Mortgages are very cheap. To do a construction loan on a new house, you can also just get typical bank financing. As a homeowner, it's very easy. Going to the city to getting all the permitting, I went to the city and I'm like, "Listen, I'm the architect, I'm the contractor, and I'm the homeowner." And he was like, "Great, let me see your drawings." And he just stamped them and he handed them right back to me. And he was like, "Have fun." The inspector comes by every once in a while, and he just chats with me. He's a great guy. It's easy peasy because I'm taking all the risk. I own the place, and I'm doing all the work. It's my license. Like, as long as I'm not doing anything egregious, it's fine. So the barrier to entry is very low, and I think that's the thing a lot of people don't think about, is that it's actually not that hard, because you all have to live somewhere. Why don't you just live? Why don't you just use that to your advantage and leverage it? That is what DDG did. That is what Alloy did. They lived in their very first projects, and most of the people that I talk to all live in their subsequent projects, because even if you have a 8-unit building or a 10-unit building, you'll generally need some sort of lease ups before you get those big construction loans. And if you yourself are signing on that lease, you're a person. You have an income. You have a business. It's legitimate, and the banks will see that, and they'll help sign, and that'll help you get that loan for that next construction project.
That's a great example. You know, you said one thing, of course, that made me tickled me a little bit. You said, "And we have a mountain." That's one thing that no one in Indianapolis has ever said. So, congratulations.
When you come out of New York City's actually got a great range of things. There's beaches on one side, there's mountain, there's Connecticut, and so you got to kind of figure out what you want in your backyard. And so we had to make that decision. We chose mountain.
Okay, that's great. That's great. So, Katharine, we have a question.
Well, yeah, I think you pretty much just answered this question, but here was one of the questions that a lot of people were asking, and Javier has said this morning, "How do you find the resources to fund the projects?"
I think that's a common thing that I myself was always curious about in the beginning when I started looking into this, and nearly all my friends always ask me the same thing, is that, like, I'm an architect, I don't have any money, and it's like nobody spends their own money on a house. Not even a billionaire is going to spend cash on building a house. You know why? Interest rates are so low. Why would you do that? You can put that $1 billion to work somewhere else and take out a bank loan and it's financially it's more feasible. Like it's the better way to do it. Most of if any of you guys work on commercial projects or larger projects, you're probably used to a requisition process where your clients have to get a bank loan and build a building. You yourself will have to get a bank loan. The money that goes to make a building is called a capital stack. And I think, Jeff, you were talking about that earlier this week on the Context and Clarity. And a capital stack is basically just the accumulation of all the money that's going to be required to make a building. Now, the vast majority of time, the substantial amount of that capital stack is bank financing. It's just a loan. It's like a mortgage. And that might be different. It might be 70%. It might be 80% of the overall fees you might need. It's not nearly ever going to be 100%. The banks did that before 2008. They won't do it again. But that's part of the money, right? So now you just got to come up with the rest of it. Now, the rest of that is where you got to get creative on how you're going to get it. It can be similar to like a mortgage where you put 20% down. You can get an FHA mortgage and put 3.5% down. You can get a 203K loan, which is an FHA approved mortgage from the government of the United States of America, backed by Fannie Mae. And for 3.5% down, you can get enough money to buy a piece of property and renovate it. And that's what some people have done. It is a very low barrier to entry way of doing it. I considered doing it. Ultimately, we didn't do it on this one, but you basically just want to try to get you don't need money to do a project. You just need the delta between the money the bank is going to get you and what you need for the rest. And that's where people do get investors. That's where people do, maybe it's cash from your salary job or your other businesses. That's where people have looked into crowdfunding now. That's where people are trying to find all kinds of other ways of generating that last 20 to 30%. Many architects are using their architectural fees to go to the bank, as long as you have. This is very convoluted conversation, but like if you need to basically make multiple types of businesses to make all this work, right? You need your architecture business, you need a developer business, maybe you have a contractor business, all of that. You put contracts together between all yourself. So you need to write yourself a contract and bill yourself an invoice. And if you do that for your architectural fees and for the fees, the time that you're going to have to spend as the architect, not as the developer, going to the city, getting the permits and doing all of that, that's real value. And if you make a invoice to yourself and you pay that invoice, you can take that to the bank and say, listen, I've already spent 7% of all of the required money on this architect who happens to be myself, but it's this company, and I've already spent that money. I've also already bought the property, and that represents 15% of the value. So now I'm already up to 20-something% of everything you need. Can you just give me the last piece? I think I already have enough value in here. Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is okay, but maybe like $5,000 more. And that's all it takes. Like a lot of these guys, they're able to start a project on not too much money. Like you can really start small and try to crank up the lever a little bit on the first few projects. I think that's the better way to do it. It's that you don't want to get too far ahead of your skis and do a $7 million project right off the bat. I mean, I think that's what Lance Psycho and them did. They started off pretty big. I wouldn't do that. But for these smaller projects, it doesn't take much. And then you had mentioned, Jeff, on the byline of the book, the self-initiating work. I mean, my whole thing on that is it's not always about getting that loan and making the money. There's Moss Design they're out of Cambridge, I think, but they recently opened up an office in Poughkeepsie, New York, and their whole impetus right now is they go and find out what Poughkeepsie needs. What does the city need? What if we had this thing here, this project there, this thing there? They figured out, they design it, they figure out how much money it's gonna take to do all of that, and then they go find the money. They find investors, they find government grants, they find funding in other ways, and they make the project happen. That's not necessarily the same as like what Jonathan Siegel is doing and everything like that, but it's very much self-initiating stuff. Katharine Darmstadt out of Chicago had done similar things on making little community parks by just like raising money and then going to the city and say, hey, look, I'm raising this money, can we make these parks? And they'd say, okay, yeah, we'll put the rest of the money down in. And then suddenly she has a park to design and her little part of Chicago gets an amenity. Yeah. I mean, it's money's out there. It's not always about just like, where can I get some cash and make several $1 million worth of building? Because that's not how it usually works. It's usually it's this capital stack of a whole bunch of different parts of money that comes together to make projects happen.
So someone had an idea this morning. We don't know whether it's feasible or not, but Michael Jern wanted to know if you could partner with a landowner to avoid having to finance the land during development. So somehow make the landowner involved with the whole development so that you don't actually have to spend money on the land until it's time to build.
So the landowner brings their equity to it. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be their equity into the project. At the end of the day, I don't think the bank is going to care that you personally have. They just care that the project has the equity. And if you're partnering with another person, you probably want to create your own little LLC or whatever for that partnership of those two people, and then that partnership owns the land, even though maybe your stake in that partnership is the other percent that doesn't include the land. So maybe your stake in the partnership is 30% and there's 70% because they're bringing the land. But then that land gets you that equity percent that you need for the bank. And a lot of times if you're able to get, so for example, for us, we got this land basically free because we bought a house that already had it included. And so what that means, but we can't just go straight to the bank and say, hey, look, we have this land. They'll be like, it's worth nothing. You literally paid nothing for it. But if you sit on it for, I think it's like a year to 2 years, it's called seasoning. Suddenly what you paid for it 2 years ago is irrelevant now. Now it's like, okay, well, what's a comp? Well, that piece of land goes for $180,000 otherwise in the city. So that has a huge value. And so that's a large percentage of whatever your construction cost is going to be. There you go. You got your 20%, your 30%.
Yeah. You know, a lot of these, I mean, it doesn't surprise me. When we had the topic yesterday of what's stopping you, what's holding you back, I fully expected that the very first comment, the very first thing was going to be money. And so, we get into this conversation. Totally understandable why. I mean, you just rattled off, and we've got several people commenting. This is going to be worth 2 or 3 or 4 listenings. Going back to this, which is fantastic. There's a lot of information here, and a lot of strategies that we're touching on. So, one question is maybe we've got an audience of an awful lot of architects here. Some in the audience won't be, right? They'll be from other professions and things, but a lot of this audience is architects. So if we assume that today they are an architect, but they are not a developer, what is the toughest part of making the transition from, forgive me everybody, but I'm going to put this in quotes, just an architect to architect and developer? What's the toughest part about making that transition from one to both? Maybe
It's got to be the taking on the risk, or having an appetite for risk, because that's the whole thing, right? Like, I think that's what, money aside, I think money is the quick snap thing that people first come to when they think about all this. But if they think about it for more than 5 seconds, then they'll probably start to think about risk. They'll think about losing the shirts. They'll think about, oh my God, like, I knew of a guy who developed a thing and lost the business and blah, 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 whatever. You guys I think it's understood. Architects have a lot of risk. They have a lot of upside, right? And because they're getting paid for that risk. You're forgetting the fact that architects have just as much risk, but our upside is capped to a fixed fee. Like, it's ridiculous. You can, if that building leaks or there's water coming in the basement of a project that you're an architect of record on, like, you're going to get called on that. If anything goes wrong in any of our past buildings, we're going to get sued. If our project has been done for 6 months, we don't have any more payment coming in, the client's still going to call me and absorb my time. And at the end of the day, all an architect does is sell time. And so it's like, what am I supposed to do? Not take the call? There's no more fees coming in. What if the client stops paying? What if they pay late and you still have to pay your staff? Like, the risks are so high on being an architect, and that's just an architect as a owner. Like, if you're an architect and you're an employee, there's still a lot of risks. You're selling. You could get fired tomorrow. Like, in the last year, so many offices cut salaries by 20%. That's a pretty big risk, and you have no control over that. You're just an employee. Like, there's so much risk in our profession and in everybody's lives that they may not necessarily realize that they're really undertaking. The difference in a developer is that they're factoring that in, and they're just that's the whole "I'm getting paid for it" thing. And so I think a lot of it is just absorbing that, understanding it, and jumping on it. And I think that does take a specific mindset, which I just happen to be all in on. Like I said, I moved to Germany without speaking German and got a job, and my boss thought that was hilarious, and that was part of the reason he hired me and put me in front of all of his clients. But you got to have that sort of go-getter attitude to do that, I think. But I don't know. It's not for everyone, for sure.
Well, you used a word here a minute ago. You said control, and I think that's a big thing, right? As architects, you just described it, right? You're going to do the design, the CDs, go through CA. The thing is substantially complete, but you're still on the hook, and you have no control, no real control over the way it was constructed, any of the things, and I think having control, and I mentioned earlier, I've done a little bit of this, and I always thought that the more that we did, the more that we performed, the more that we had control over, as long as we were doing our jobs and we were paying attention to the things that we needed to pay attention to, the actual more control we had over the risk. And I thought that was sort of the ultimate payoff. Well, financially, certainly, but
where the circle really comes around, though, is when you realize that when the architect and developers that are really big, DDG and Alloy, I keep coming back to them, but there's so many of them, they hire architects of record.
Nice.
Because why would they take on that risk for a stupid low fee? Like, it's just built in, and they can just like, wait, here's one I can just buy my way out of for a couple of percentage points, no problem.
So everybody in the audience is now trying to get their head wrapped around what you just said. Hopefully you heard that. He said that these architects as developers who maybe have moved more towards the development side now are hiring architects of record for their projects because they understand the absurdity of the risk on the architect side.
So Guerrilla Development has done amazing stuff out of Portland. They're really big on they were really the first ones that did crowdfunding, but in a crowdfunding of a regulation DUA. And his very first project was really wild. He was able to acquire a piece of property, and he wanted to develop a building. And he was an employee of an office, of a mid-sized office. He went to his boss and said, "Can I hire you as my architect? And can then I work on that job as the project manager?" And his boss was like, "Okay, here's a contract." They signed it. And so every other week he would get a little paycheck and then sign a big check to his boss. But it was his way of actually mitigating the risk of all of the problems of being an architect on a job.
That's a pretty amazing story.
It was definitely interesting and weird. It's one I hadn't heard before. There's a lot. But there's a lot of these guys. That's the thing, is they're not using their cleverness or their intelligence to design a better box. They're using it to design a way of putting money together and making a project happen. And a lot of these guys have done, and girls have done, really interesting things in that way. Schenectady out of Ann Arbor has started approaching businesses in Ann Arbor that she knew was going to take off the ground, and approached them ahead of time, and started asking them, "Hey, do you have an architect yet? Can we go look at properties together? Can we do all this stuff?" And then she ends up owning a small percentage of their business moving forward. So she does the sort of foregrounding of finding them property, finding a way to make the property work for them, and then designing it. And then she takes a little bit part of the building of it, and then owns a piece of it at the end of the day, and collects rent. Like it's an interesting way of designing a way to make the project happen rather than just trying to design the building.
Yeah, that's a great structure.
So here's a question that is, I just want to know the answer to it when it came up this morning. So what's the scariest or most risky project you've undertaken? I mean, you'd mentioned earlier that people don't talk about the ones that don't work out that well. You really don't hear about them. So
yeah, so I'll stop talking about DDG after this, and I hope nobody from their office, or Peter Guthrie, is not listening. I promise. But anyways, it's kind of well known now that they started scaling up, and there's this project that just finished construction, or is just finishing construction on the Upper East Side of the city on 88th Street, and their concrete subcontractor bankrupted as that building was like halfway in the air. And that is a very big building, and that had a lot of money into it, and DDG was all in on that, and there was no way they could fail. And so that building became, I don't even know what's going on in the world of DDG right now. I know that they de-staffed a ton of people. They've scaled way down. They've had to cut corners, and I believe that, I don't know if Peter Guthrie's out now, but I've heard rumors that he will be out soon, because that as a business model, that was maybe a little bit too far. But they sort of reached an area where they could no longer build the building with the money that they had. They definitely went out ahead of their skis, and because it was such a big building and it was only halfway done at the time when the most expensive subcontractor defaulted, there wasn't a lot you could do other than spend a whole ton of money to get the building done. Obviously, when that building sells, as it's selling now, they should recoup all of that fee by a ton. But I don't know whether or not that's happening. I think it's another thing to wait for another year or two to figure out. It's going to be interesting to watch. I know there's Alex Barrett has also had a little bit of issues in scaling up. He scaled up a little too fast as well. Did two projects at the same time that were massive, and had to scale down his staff, get rid of his office and everything as he's trying to sell these units out. But as long as they sell, he should be totally fine, and he's a good guy, so it should be good. But there's a moment in here where a lot of these guys are really on the edge of their toes with all of their money.
Yep.
So that kind of segues into Isra's comment, because she, someone going bankrupt in the middle of the project. How do you, Isra wants to know, how do you find reliable subcontractors?
I wish I could tell you where my electrician is right now. I've been calling him every single day for the last fucking 3 weeks. Sorry. But subcontractors are very difficult. I suggest waiting another 30 or 40 years until robots start building buildings, because at least they'll show up every day.
Maybe we don't have to wait that long. Someone could start working on that.
there's a lot of people working on that. What do you think Autodesk is doing, and why they're not creating the next Revit? They're not interested in the next Revit. They're interested in building buildings. That's so hard. Like, it is so hard to find any subcontractors right now, mainly because it's such a hot market, and there's so many other things for them to do. And I've been on many job sites as the architect where the subs just quit because there's more money to be made elsewhere, and it's such a pain in the butt because it just drives up cost and delays everything because somebody doesn't want to do the job that they were contracted to do. It's so hard, and I think that's what drives a lot of these guys who are developing buildings to also self-perform work. That is why a lot of these guys are also builders, besides being architects and developers. That's why Gluck Plus builds a lot of their stuff, is because at the end of the day, it gets so frustrating to watch somebody do such a bad job for so much money, and you're like, well, wait a second, I can just do that myself. And as a firm owner, you realize that, why am I paying this carpenter the equivalent of $80,000, $90,000 a year, when I can hire a recent graduate from architecture school for like $40,000, and that guy is he's going to work 12 hours a day, and he's going to be super excited, and he's going to go hang that door just perfect. So to be honest, that's a lot of why Gluck Plus and a lot of these other offices do design build and have a lot of staff on hand, is because at the end of the day, young architects are cheaper than carpenters, and they'll have a lot more passion and actually do the job right.
Wow. Okay. So the answer is young architecture school graduates who are still willing to work 14 hours a day.
Honest to God, it really is. They are really a good deal. Like, they're really excited. They want to get in there. They want to learn. And a lot of the work that these subcontractors do is not difficult. It's just, it's hard to motivate subcontractors right now.
Huh. That's actually a pretty interesting idea for a company, like a design build company made it all up.
What do you think I'm going to do?
Whoops.
Yeah. I think those are all good points. And ultimately, it's all about building the right team. Now, apologies to everybody for a sports analogy, but if you're somebody like the Chicago Cubs or the Chicago Bears, and you can't for the life of you put together the right players at the right time, then you're going to really struggle. But and it's not necessarily easy to put them together, but that's ultimately what we have. What we have to attempt to do. And again, I'm going down the baseball road, but I'm going deeper. Sorry, everybody. The Atlanta Braves built their dynasty in the 90s on their farm team. So almost everybody from the World Series Atlanta Braves came from the farm team, which would be the equivalent of the recent architecture grads.
Yep. I grew up in Houston, so I hated the Braves of the 90s. They kept us out of every freaking World Series. Damn Maddox.
We're sorry.
Well, I'm happy to beat my trash can. Cheating's winning. That's all I care.
So what's Rod have to say here?
So Rod wants to know if you could talk a bit about the developers who have tied community enriching elements into their developments.
There's definitely a lot of that. So, a big difference between historically, a lot of developers came from a construction background, and more in the last decade or two, or a couple of decades, it's been more of a financial background. So people who are historically just developers have an MBA or something like that. Our architecture school tends to facilitate, as you guys know, a lot of more social agendas, a little more left-leaning, and things that we care about things. We just want to make a better place for all of us, really. And so a lot of these guys who are architects and developers, they're probably doing a little more for all of us than the straight developers. There's some good examples out there. Like I said, Katharine Darmstadt is really focused on a lot of that stuff, Moss Design. Guerrilla Development, of their second crowdfunding campaign was really interesting because they were raising $300,000 as part of a capital stack. And again, none of these, I want to be very clear, there's no buildings that have crowdfunded the entire capital stack. All of them were literally crowdfunding the mezzanine debt, which is just that little piece that they need to then go to the bank and say, hey, look, I've got this amount of money. And so Kevin raised $300,000 in 3 days. It was for a project that was going to be an SRO for homeless people in Portland. And it was going to give homeless people a very cheap, very cost-effective place to live. And his target rent was the exact state amount that the state of Oregon was giving homeless people, that said, hey, if you can find a place to live for, I think it was like $400 a month, we'll give you this $400 voucher. And so Kevin was like, well, how do I make a place that can give you a room for $400? And so he figured out the money, but the only way to make that work was to do this crowdfunding and offer people a 5% return, which is a very low return. Like, especially right now in the stock market, you can make way more than 5%. So if you're a typical developer and a typical person and you're trying to raise money, nobody's going to give you an investment for a 5% return. It's just not enough, especially not in real estate where there are risks. But because his had a social agenda and a social slant to it, he raised the money in 3 days, because at the end of the day, people would rather take a lower return for a social cause than just go for maximum money. And I thought that was a very interesting way that Kevin was able to handle the situation. Beyond that, there's in the city, there's Alloy that has a lot of amenities in some of their developments, but some of it, like the schools, are really just an incentive to all developers in New York City, whereas the city of New York has not financed a school in the last 2 or 3 decades. Every single school that's been built is built under a program where if a developer includes a school in their building and pays for it completely, they're allowed to build much taller. So like the shop towers that split and everything like that, they all have a school in the basement. And that's the way that they were able to build up so high. So Alloy is currently building a very super tall tower in Brooklyn, and the way they were able to get that height was by building a school at the bottom, which is it's a public amenity, but it's just kind of a developer tool that a lot of developers use.
That's really interesting. It's that's I assume that's a pretty New York specific example.
It's a clever way for the city to get new schools. I mean, there's a lot of new schools all throughout the city, and it's all because of that.
Interesting.
So Ed had a question. I don't know if we have time to address it, but it's still an interesting question about an MBA in real estate development. Is that kind of program worth it?
So a lot more schools are coming onto this. I think Columbia was really one of the first schools to have a more integrated architecture school and real estate together as a program. And then Berkeley came on, and then there's a lot of other ones too. Now at Yale, you can do an architecture school half and then get an MBA and a MArch at the same time. And now I see a lot more schools trying to do it. I don't know. I mean, for one, the MBA is getting more watered down as a degree in general. Number two, my friends, I know several people that have gone through these programs. They've all come out the other end and they just work for a developer. Like they just become developers, like an actual developer, or they work for one. So if that's what you want to do, that's probably a good angle. Your architectural knowledge will be valuable to them. But for you to go and spend the time there, I mean, I would only do it if you're also going to be I wouldn't do it in a Zoom world. I would go there to be integrated into an environment business school is about making friends. Really, it's about doing all of the extracurriculars outside of business school. It's not about being in the classroom. It's about being on the rowing crew and the hockey team and going and doing events together and making lifelong friends and bouncing ideas off each other and learning from each other. So if you're going to do it, I would make sure to do it in an environment like that. And obviously, if you want to do it at the highest end, Wharton is the best school for real estate in America. And that would be a really invaluable experience. One of the partners, AJ, which is one of the partners of Alloy, has a Wharton degree. So, I mean, it can be valuable as long as you do it right.
So just now you said that you could be a real developer. So what is the difference between an architect developer and a developer?
I meant for a company who is they're just developers. They're just developers. They hire right. Architects to do the work. And I have lots of friends that have gone that route. They were initially paid much better than we were out of graduate school. Although that starts to change architect salaries do jump up after time, especially in New York, as long as you jump around enough. But their lives are generally not as pleasant. They don't seem as happy as we do, I guess. I don't know.
That's interesting.
Nothing too much about Kasha and Brian, but I love them, but they don't seem happy.
Yeah. Mark says, take the money for the MBA and bring it to the bank for a loan for
honestly, you could probably, I thought about that myself. I thought about going back and getting an MBA and doing another degree and spending more time in college. But, honestly, it's going to be cheaper for me to flip a house and build a house than it is to go to school. It's actually going to be the inverse. I will actually make more money than I would have gone and gotten a job or whatever. And I feel like you're going to learn just as much
by doing.
Yeah, by doing it. At the end of the day,
Yeah.
a big building and a small building is you buy it for X, you put in Y, and you try to make sure you get more than that at the end of the day, at the end of the project. And you can do that in an academic sense and everything and spend a lot of money on that, or you can just go do it and figure it out. And as long as you do it, my whole point about doing it on an existing house is the risk is super low, because if you fuck it up, just go sell it. Sorry, I cuss a lot. It's New York. If you mess it up, you just resell it. A house has value, and in a time of COVID, anything will sell. It doesn't really matter. And so, if you lost $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000, that's still cheaper than an MBA. But odds are you may be able to, if you're smart enough, you're going to make $100,000 or something. Like it's not so hard.
So in your work right now, how much would you classify as traditional architecture practice versus architect as developer, or is there any?
Well, right now I think there's actually less architecture, because it's, to me, that part is easy and fast and just make, I think a lot of time people already have ideas in their heads about how they would do something or design something. And so it's a matter of carrying through that process. But a lot of it is mentally is figuring out all of the other things of making the project happen and getting it done.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any clients right now, or are you your own client on all your projects?
I do have some. The problem right now with clients is like how much do you charge them, right? Because I'm not trying to be competitive, but here's the bigger problem. Somebody recently was giving me a comment on my fees being a little high, right? They wanted my fees to be lower because they can get this done somewhere else. Well, my time is actually worth more for myself than it is for somebody else, and I think that's the bigger barrier to entry here is the money, the risk, but it's really the time. It's the time that it takes to do all of this. But once you start hiring yourself, you realize that you're more valuable to yourself than you are to somebody else. And so why would I charge that? I'm going to make what with working at per hour for this guy, when for myself I can make way more. And if I spend all of my time working for other clients, then I'm at risk for screwing all of this other stuff up and screwing up my own projects, which is not good to me. So basically, I have to lose clients by giving very high bids and seeing if they'll take it. And if they'll take it, then it's the cost of my time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Believe it or not, we've made it almost to the top of the hour. It's flown by here. So maybe the way to round out this conversation is to ask, do you have a piece of advice or, some advice for any of the architects that are in the audience right now that are ready, or think they're ready to start to take the leap? What advice?
Just go. And I think one of the advices I got on just starting a practice in general from ARO, and then subsequently what I learned from talking with the Up Studio New York, which I think are a fantastic group of guys, is that you have to do what you want to do. Like if you ultimately want to do high-end residential houses, you need to go develop a high-end residential house, because that's what's going to get you the work later. If you spend all of your time doing stuff that you don't want to do, you will continue to do stuff that you don't want to do, because that's what everybody is going to pay attention to. The Up Studio is fantastic. You guys got to go to their website. It's theupstudio.com. They started with the development because they were doing these not so great renovation projects, because that's all people would hire them for. And they bought a piece of land. They built a really cool modern house that had nothing to do with anything they had done before. And then people started hiring them left and right. And now their work is fantastic. And now they are really a hotshot design studio in the city. And nobody was going to see that beforehand. They only got that by going out there and doing it themselves. And I don't think they're developing anymore. They're interested in that. They just wanted to build that billboard so that way they could be the architect that they wanted to be.
Yeah, that's a super cool story. And we run across that all the time. How do I break into this? How do I find more clients like this? There's a great example of the way that they did it. Appreciate that story.
There have been a couple questions about either should you build something and hold on to it, or should you then rent it out? So kind of this example of building this house that you want everybody to see. If they And recently there was an article about architects making buildings and then Airbnb, keeping them for Airbnb so a lot of people can be exposed to them. It just reminded me of that. So what would you generally say? Does it depend on the project? Is it better to sell, like hold, or sell?
It's probably going to be part of the pro forma and figuring out what financially makes sense. Unfortunately, renting is just so hard to make. Like in this country, like you make a building, it costs the rental market is set by the rental market is what it is, right? Like if people spend $2,000 a month on rent, they're not going to spend $2,400 in that area. Like you can get, there's certain top ends, but like it's going to cap out. And so you can only build something. It's really hard to build something and capitalize on it correctly unless you're building a certain scale. I think long term, building it and holding it and renting it is a better solution for you to have a sort of passive income and moving all of that along, but it comes with added risks and management and all that stuff as well. But in the beginning, most people tend to build and sell because they need to refill their coffers. They need to get that cash so they can build the next project. Holding it and renting it is difficult to do in the beginning because you just need that money to move on to the next project.
That's great advice. A great experience there. You got a lot of resources out there, James. You've got your book, obviously. You've got the Architect and Developer website. There's an Architect and Developer Slack channel. What's that about?
Yep, I was just trying to jump on that bandwagon of people on Slack. We have that. Anybody who wants to join that, I can let them in. Every once in a while, there's conversations happening. Not too often. I wish more. You guys can also always reach out to me on Architect Developer, james@architectdeveloper.com. And any questions you have, I'm happy to talk to, happy to chat, any of that stuff.
Great. Appreciate that. And for anybody, if you want to know more about the Slack channel, architectanddeveloper.slack.com. The URL is on the bottom left of your screen right now. So you can check that out. Maybe you can start some conversations if things are a little slow over there. So might become a great community for Architect and Developer, a way for all of you to learn more about that. James, this has been the number of, I'm just kind of watching the comments go by, and the number of people that said, I'm going to watch this 2 or 3 or 4 times is I've never seen that many people say that before. So that means that you have given us a lot of knowledge bombs, a lot of great information here. Really appreciate the conversation today.
It's been awesome, man. Thanks.
It's again, a very popular topic, not only in the Entree Architect community, but beyond. And welcome to all of you that are joining this conversation from beyond the Entree Architect community because you're just interested in this topic. This is Context and Clarity. We have these conversations in a different form, 4 days a week. It's a live stream. It's just me with all of you, the audience, covering a specific topic and having a conversation for an hour via Facebook Live. Of course, Thursdays like today, we have this, which we call our Context and Clarity Live, where we have a special guest. Obviously, today, James is our special guest, and we have a different guest every single week. Last week, we had Emily Mottram. Today, obviously, we have James Petty. Next week, we'll have Julie Brown, who is a business development and networking expert. That will be a lively conversation.
Yeah, she's a lot of fun. That doesn't sound like the most fun title, but she's a very fun person.
She's a lot of fun. She is a lot of fun. And some of you that have done some of my challenges have met Julie in the backstage of the challenges. You know, those conversations are fun and wild, and you'll take a lot away from that. So we'll have Julie next week. But this is basically wrapping up our week of discussions about Architect and Developer, or Architect as Developer. Tomorrow, in our Context and Clarity conversation, we'll go back to our bi-weekly feature of our Mystery Member Spotlight. We started this a few months ago, basically to get to know each other better.
That's
What's
already
that?
tomorrow. My goodness, it's been
That
2
is
weeks already. It just time's
that is
flying.
already tomorrow. Yeah, it's flown by. So I
Yeah.
can't tell you who our member spotlight will be tomorrow because we'll play the little game. We'll have you ask questions and try to guess who our member is. But it's a great way for us
Mm.
to get to know each other, to build our community, and to learn more about each other. So join us for that. We'll be on Clubhouse tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern, and we do a similar thing on those member spotlight days on Clubhouse where I'll start with a question. We just, tell us more about yourself. Let's get to know each other a little bit better. And then next week, we'll kick into business development and networking because we'll be working towards that conversation with Julie Brown on Thursday. So again, thank you to James for joining us today. Fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot, which I always appreciate. And I know everybody else out there has echoed that over and over through this conversation. So, James, thank you for all of this. And Katharine, thank you. And to both of you, please stay safe. Try to dry out a little bit in a water sense. You can make what other determinations beyond that. And to all of you out there in the audience, thank you. Appreciate all of you. I say this all the time, but thank you for making context and clarity a thing. Because if it weren't for you, we would not have had this conversation with James today. So appreciate all of you in this community you have built around context and clarity, and always look forward to the next conversation. So be well, stay safe. Find a little bit of time tonight to breathe, relax a little bit, find a little way to rejuvenate because we're going to do this again tomorrow. And I hope that I will see all of you somewhere sometime soon. Thanks, everybody.